Welcome back. I hope you all had a wonderful lunch. I think you did because you all ate the desserts before I could get there. So I think I'm looking forward to the tea break already. No, this has been some fantastic conversations this morning. They were definitely carrying on into the lunch break. And now we have a fantastic panel to talk about the thing that everyone is talking about. But before we get into the panel, I just want to try something with you guys. I want you to think of a number between 0 and 10. And this is, I guess we call this the FOSI optimism scale. 0 being the least optimistic or the most pessimistic about things. And in this case, we're going to talk about generative AI. And 10 being the most. So 0, it's an existential risk. GenAI is coming for you, the rest of humanity. It's the end times. And 10 is at the other end of the spectrum. It's going to cure cancer. It's going to deal with climate change. And we will all live to 150 instead of, well, anyway, it's going to be great. So think of a number. Actually, I'll ask the panelists.
No, you asked, no, I thought you were asking them. Sorry.
We're going to have a difficult panel, I can see already. All right, show of hands, anyone in the 0 to 5 range? How many in the 0 to 5 range? Okay, couple of pessimists. 6 to 8. Any 9s and 10s? All right, Andy.
Statistics are awesome.
I couldn't have said it better myself. I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that, but anyway. Any of the panelists like to share their number before we go any further?
I'm a neutral 5.
Oh, dear. Okay, neutral 5.
I'm a 7 or an 8, I think.
Optimistic?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a strong 8.
Strong 8.
Strong 8. Not 9 or 10 range.
I'm in this. I'm a 7.5. Is that okay?
With me, yeah.
We'll stay to that. All right. Enough of this. Generative AI is what we're going to talk about. Before we talk, let's introduce ourselves. Courtney, would you start?
Sure. My name is Courtney Gregoire. I serve as Microsoft's Chief Digital Safety Officer. After about a decade of government service, I joined Microsoft, I guess, about 11 years ago. And I now have the pleasure of leading a multidisciplinary team that thinks about digital safety across Microsoft's broad range of products and services.
Cool.
I'm Vick Nash. I am head of a department at the University of Oxford called the Oxford Internet Institute up there. And I am lucky enough to work with about 50 colleagues looking at different aspects of digital life online. And small fact, I've been there for 21 years, so since it started, one of the first things we did look at was child digital safety, so that has not changed. What has changed was the other one of our first events was looking at the effects of broadband, which was defined as 1 meg. So Things have changed.
I'm Henry Platten. I'm co-founder of GoBubble. We care about respectful communication at scale. Former police sergeants, have worked in this arena now for about 17 years. And in particular, I'm very captivated by generative AI. One, because we're already moderating generative AI, both text and image at GoBubble. And also, we're actually creating our own generative AI at the moment, which will be out just in time for the November conference.
Whoa, big news. All right, thank you. Matt.
Matt Soeth. I'm head of trust and safety at Spectrum Labs AI, and we do online content moderation and work with different partners in online capacities. So gaming might be Riot Games, dating, Grindr, and other various apps to help detect online harms and keep users safe.
Fabulous. Well, we're sitting alphabetically, but in a way, it's very appropriate that you're sitting right here because Microsoft has been really at the forefront of all of this. You may want to speak a little bit about that, or you could maybe just start with how does generative AI and online safety intersect within the company, would you say?
Sure. You did articulate Microsoft has really been thinking deeply about the opportunity that generative AI presents, and everyone here probably is aware of our large investment in OpenAI and how we've now thought about integrating generative AI across the range of Microsoft products and services. We really do think that generative AI hits at the heart of digital safety. And we think about it in multiple lenses. Obviously, as we think about building in generative AI capabilities across a range of products and services, you really start at the concept of what is product quality. And you take some of those best practices you've learned from safety into that product quality moment. And why do I say that? Because that's at the moment of what's the content going to generate? How's that going to be deployed? And you think about that in a multimodal fashion. But really quickly, it evolves in a co-creator model. And that is, understandably, the term of art that we use as we think about our deployment across Microsoft. This is now co-created content with human prompts and the capability of computer generated. And we think about that holistically. We want the product to be safe, trained on appropriate data, thinking about fairness and equity. And then we want to make sure that you're taking that next step of having a user understand what are the safety implications so that they now integrate safety by design. I think that's an interesting moment for us to reflect on, and it's at the heart of how we think about governance. I think one piece that we have been at the forefront, you mentioned, is we recognize globally it is time for regulation at scale on these issues. And I'm happy to talk more about that as we go on, but there are lots of principles that already apply. So no one here should think this is the legal Wild West. Clearly, the principles of privacy law, of the existing safety regimes, apply to how we think about generative AI. But when it comes to how generative AI may be integrated in critical infrastructure, we know that there are other legal regimes would make sense to update. For example, we want safety breaks in a critical infrastructure integration. That is a logical step. And we do think there's an interesting concept to pull out from what we've learned from the banking financial institutions. We all know the concept of know your customer. Well, when it comes to generative AI, we probably need to know at a systems level. We call it now the K3YC. Know your cloud. What are you utilizing to actually integrate the generative AI? Know your customer. And know your content. And if we think about those concepts, we can talk a little bit more how those can apply in some updated legal regulatory schemes.
Well, let me stay with you. I had the pleasure of seeing your Brad Smith present, what did he call it? The 5-point blueprint for governing AI in Washington a couple of weeks ago. For our audience, just describe a little bit of what he was saying at that time.
Yeah, so I just leaned in on a couple points there, if that makes sense. First and foremost, take heart that we do believe legal and regulatory regimes apply in this phase of generative AI. The second is recognizing that for critical infrastructure, we need to build in safety breaks, and we believe government regulation has a critical role there. Thinking about critical infrastructure, I'm leaning into large-scale power, electrical systems, water systems. When we mean a safety break, really, how do we make sure at the heart of this, there's a capability to turn it off when needed, when it's integrated into critical infrastructure? On the third pillar, it's really unpacking the opportunity to better have provenance over the information ecosystem. We know at the heart of why we think generative AI has such great potential is if you keep humans at the center of it. But keeping humans at the center of it is making sure anyone who is consuming generative AI content in any form knows the provenance of that content. And so there is an opportunity to think about, both through standards and best practices and the role of law, how are we going to help anyone in the information ecosystem understand how that content was generated, how it was edited, and who the publisher is. I mentioned the K3YC principles we think make a lot of sense from a governance perspective. But last but certainly not least is the core principle we've had at Digital Safety this whole time, and that is the potential for AI to solve some of the really vexing whole of society problems requires a whole of society approach to do that. Big tech isn't going to unlock that cure for cancer. That has to be a multi-stakeholder, thoughtful process. And if we think about great concerns about disinformation, or whether AI has the potential challenge of exacerbating tensions and violent extremism, we need to take the same approach that we've led on through multi-stakeholder forums to unlock that potential.
And I do have to ask you this, what can we expect from Microsoft products themselves? In other words, between now and the end of the year, say, am I going to be able to go into a Word document and just think about some things and it'll generate stuff? Or where are we going to be?
No, we're not there. You're going to have to prompt it. But I think the concept of how we're building this is really at the heart of keeping humans at the center of the opportunities that AI can unlock. And so whether you've used GitHub and Copilot, which is the first Copilot integration that really helped unlock the power of coding to those, I'll include myself in this, who aren't necessarily first coders at their language. The capability of using natural language and developing code was how we saw what AI could unlock in GitHub. We think that integration you'll start seeing across our services. So hopefully you won't just think it and it'll produce it, but wouldn't it be wonderful that the memo that you may have given to all of us on this panel about what we would be talking about could be turned into a PowerPoint slide through the capabilities of generative AI and then back to an executive summary as a trip report coming out of this. But it really does mean the humans interacting with the product and the humans at the core and the heart of it. Hopefully you've played a little bit with the new Bing. We think about that as the opportunity to unlock the information ecosystem in a way that makes it more accessible to more people. And then some of the great potentials is what will it mean to get really much more comfortable in languages and cultural competency across the globe in these opportunities.
Yeah, Bing is a thing.
Bing, ooh.
Do you like that?
From marketing here?
New Bing. Vicky, let's move on to you. Now, I think I can gather from you and your colleagues' scores, you're relatively sanguine about this. There are some in academia who are not, and they were signing petitions to stop all of this. Talk to us about how you and OII are thinking about generative AI and what we should and maybe should not be so concerned about.
Sure. So, I mean, you may have guessed, I guess, from the mark that I gave, that I'm very much of the let's not panic brigade here. It has felt, quite frankly, over the last few months as if we've become the Institute of ChatGPT, and what people have wanted to hear from us about is existential risk, the end of the planet, sort of all doom and gloom. And quite frankly, for me as head of department, for my colleagues who've been doing superb research on AI for many years, it's quite dispiriting that actually, people, particularly media, are less interested, frankly, in so the long history we've got actually of understanding broadly continuity and change around new technological innovations, and putting new techniques like generative AI in that context. So it's not super exciting perhaps to say we actually understand quite a bit about AI and societal implications. We understand about bias and inequality in inputs. We understand about, say, content-generated risks or how bad actors seek to, misuse new tools. But yeah, so we very much frame this debate, I have to say, within the context of, 22 years of research that we have done, years of research that others have done. And, I suppose it's fair to say, we probably have two main messages here. So the first is, yes, as Andy put so well, we do really need to make sure that we're keeping ahead of the game, that we are gaining access to the types of new data that will enable us to, identify where there possibly are new types of risk or risks affecting children in different ways. But at the same time, we can bring to bear, all the research we've already done. And that should be framing our response here. So, for example, if we are thinking about specifically children and online safety, we know an awful lot actually already about how different vulnerabilities affect children's risks. We understand a lot about the types of tools and interventions that we can use, whether that be education, family response we talked about in the last panel, whether it be safety by design. Equally, I suppose if I look to the future, I think that, it's really important we don't forget, just as we didn't, hopefully with other technologies, that there are huge opportunities here for children too. So, I really worry that because this debate is framed, again, by lots of moral panic and concerns about existential risk, that we might say, no children should have access to this. Let's shut it down. Let's not give them any use at all. And that, to me, really sort of runs against the sort of potential benefits that these technologies will have, for children, quite apart from the fact that, as we've heard so well explained, you have to use these things to learn how they work, to develop resilience and ensure that you can use them positively. So yeah, that's where we stand. It's not a very sexy position, I'm aware.
Felt pretty sexy to me, I'll tell you. In the sense that it's nuanced, it's balanced, it's reasonable. But let me ask you this. What about kids, AI, and schools and education? And you're an institute of higher education, after all. Are you happy for kids to just have full access to it?
So, again, I'm happy for kids to have access to it, but and I'm also happy for teachers to have access to it, but I do think we need an awful lot more sort of careful reflection and evaluation. And actually, funny enough, and we talked a little bit before, I know, when we were thinking about this session, about the things that scare us. And actually, one of the things that does scare me a little bit, I think, is particularly, say, governments, for example, who are, frankly, quite resource-strapped at the moment, looking at things like genAI as a way to, save on costs in schools. Maybe you can expand class numbers by, replacing teaching assistants or having more use of these sorts of things in the schoolroom. And at the moment, where we don't have maybe the sort of enough oversight from a sectoral perspective about what the best tools are and whether they work and who they work for and how teachers should be trained to use them. I do worry a little bit there that there's potential sort of negative outcomes, I think, both in terms of the types of education that kids get and in the effects on our regard, perhaps, for teachers generally. So yeah, again, maybe it's not a very exciting thing to worry about, but I do worry about some of the incentives, I think, that might sort of underpin bad outcomes here.
Okay. All right. Henry, let's come to you. It's possible some folks haven't come across GoBubble before, so it'd be helpful to talk about your work and your company's work, and how does it relate or overlap with generative AI in this context?
Thank you. The work that we do at GoBubble essentially is caring for humans. That's what drives us, all the way from our chair, Patricia Carter-Andres, all the way through to our data engineers. How we do that is by looking after respectful communication. So the work that we do crosses the globe. So we work in everywhere from America, UK, Australia, but always where there's scale. And this is where our work crosses over into generative AI, because one of the most compelling things that's come from generative AI for ourselves isn't actually generative AI, it's what sits behind it. So actually moving from AI to transformer-based AI, and transformer-based AI is what supports generative AI, the fact that you can deal with so much at scale quickly, means actually you can have meaningful impact where you want to be able to foster positive relations, foster positive communities, whatever a platform wants to do. So our work sees us go from content moderation with platforms that have 5 million monthly active users upwards, through to sports, but essentially it's always looking at that same thing. How can you protect the human at the heart? How can you use the tech for good? And that's one of the things that's always driven us.
Great. So how does this new technology, how does it impact trust and safety professionals, say, and their work? That's both, it's coming in both directions, isn't it? They're applying genAI, but also they're having to respond to text and images and much, much more. How is it impacting their work?
Massively. As we sit here today, you look at the next 18 months, and in about 18 months' time, all of these statistics show that about 10% of the world's data will have either been created or modified by generative AI. 10%. Now that's scale. So that presents massive opportunities, but also hurdles and risks, which we're talking about today, that as a community, everybody here, everybody watching online, can play a part in solving that. I think about, for one of our clients, for example, and they have massive operations, lots of user-generated content. But one of the aspects where generative AI has helped their trust and safety team essentially is broken down into 4 areas. And if I can be so bold as to steal FOSI's name for this. So first one, F, future. So the whole purpose of transformer-based AI is you can make future decisions based on previous data. And you can do that rapidly. So it's a case of you're not continually having to learn. You can look at best practice that's gone before. You can bring it into how you're operating now. O, look at the offense. Traditionally in trust and safety, we're always pessimistic and we always look at the negative and we try to build to defend that. But we're always playing catch up because we're always responding to humans, and humans will break things. Humans will misuse things, but actually what we can do now with the technology that comes as part of GenAI is actually go on the offensive for trust and safety. We can actually look at the patterns, look at the behaviors, and actually help to modify those. I'd say S could be a couple of things. It could be scale. I prefer to think about sleep.
Sleep?
Yes, sleep.
I'd like to think about sleep.
Yeah. Trust and safety professionals lose a lot of sleep, and they lose a lot of it because what's going to happen when they're away from the office? What's going to happen when there isn't that supervision of the content that's coming through their platform? Again, the world we're in now, with how AI has evolved, this is a new dawn. So this is more of an evolution, not a revolution, when it comes to AI and how it can help trust and safety. And then the final one for I'd say is intelligence. Trust and safety now, this is the era for trust and safety. Whereas in the past, potentially it's always sat at the periphery, or it's been a voice that's just sat in the corner of a boardroom that will chip in every so often. Actually now with this technology, you can put yourself front and center. You can understand deeper intelligence from your platform, and you can pass that through. And we see that with our clients. I mean, I think of the one I mentioned earlier. They were going to hire 1,000 human moderators to do the work, which is the old style. But actually, by taking this approach, they only have 30, but trust and safety has moved itself to be the core of the business. And now they reach out and they touch every corner. So I would say for trust and safety professionals, this is a very good time, but you have to lean into it.
Wow. Okay. Well, we'll be returning to some of those topics in a minute. Matt, I want to bring you in. I understand you've spent, 15 years in the classroom? Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about your own journey and your own perspectives on all of this and what's led you to the work you're doing now?
Yeah, and the teacher perspective is interesting, right? So when I started teaching, it was still phones with keyboards, like that was new, right? You flip your phone open, you have a little keyboard on there. It was like the Motorola Envy. And then kids would come into class and be like, Mr. Soeth, I have MySpace, I have 5,000 friends. I'm like, sure you do, let's do our work. Fast forward about 4 years and then smartphones, and that's when things started to change, right? Kids, I always feel young people will do anything with tech that will socially enhance their lives. Right? And that's what I see. If it's texting a friend, if it's playing a game, being connected, whatever that might be. And by 2008, when smartphones entered the scene, stuff like whether it was Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, whatever they were on, that's where things were happening. And all of the social drama that would normally happen on a campus was also happening in tech. And the same conversations, within a couple weeks of AI coming out, we got to ban it, kids are going to cheat. When phones came out, we got to ban them, kids are going to cheat. And rather than have the conversation of, well, why are they cheating? Let's get rid of the tech that enables the cheating. And there's just, to me, it's just two different systems of thinking. How can we show them how to use the tech ethically to create and to do something with it and take away the necessity to cheat because they know how to work around it and use it to help them in their learning, demonstrate their learning, et cetera. The flip side of that, to the trust and safety point, when you're the tech forward teacher on campus, everyone wants your attention. Everything from, can you fix my printer, to my computer won't turn on, to we have this incident on Instagram, right? And when that stuff started happening, it was the same type of behaviors that we saw before. If you're in middle school, so roughly about, say, 10 years old to 13 years old, it was exclusion. Kids leaving people out, tagging a friend who wasn't in the photo, which would lead to fights, which leads to drama. To this day, my favorite is a student would walk up in class and be like, Mr. So-and-so hates me. I'm like, no one wakes up hating you. How? It's not like I woke up today and be like, Gina's going down. You see what book she's carrying? Yeah, we don't read that here. That doesn't happen. You come to have a conversation, you realize someone said something online, someone said something back. Sometimes there's another friend who tells the story out of pocket, and then you got these two people want to fight, and the person doesn't want to fight, and they're like, I don't know what to do anymore, right? And stuff just escalates. And so when you look at the worst side of things, then you start to figure out, how do we investigate this? How do we work with young people to manage this drama? And that's what led to our efforts with groups like #ICanHelp, which I helped founded, to do education and work with kids. How do we respond to this? Work with administrators. How do we investigate with this? Work with teachers. How do we train people how to use this tech and to use it to enhance their learning or expand upon their learning, rather than feel like, well, if we give you this thing, you're just going to misuse it, so we can't trust you, right? Because we know that doesn't work either. The last thing that really informed my thinking in that time was really, so I taught video production, English literature, and student leadership. And student leadership is very invested in school culture. How do we empower young people? Because reality, when you're on a campus, it's 10% teachers and 90% students. They're the giant mass of individuals who are going to influence what happens in the culture. We can steer that, right? But within that, how do we empower young people to think about not only the culture of the campus, but then to actually shape it and become that healthy community? And that's the thing about online spaces as well. It's a healthy community. And I think as much as we can do to remove the bad, I also think we can do a lot to encourage the good. And I think AI can support that, right? We could look at unhealthy behaviors, whatever we want to define that as, and healthy pro-social behaviors, and have a means to encourage that to empower others. Statistically, we know in online spaces, 80% of the problems are caused by 5% of users. That's our bad actor audience. That leaves about 90%. Of that 90%, we can estimate 20 to 30%, they're always going to do the right thing. You all have that friend. It doesn't matter who, they're just going to do the right thing. The rest of it, that movable middle, that's the piece that we want to attack. And think about how do we measure that? How do we encourage that? How do we steer them in the right direction in order to think about this appropriately? And when possible, either through friends or peer pressure or just communal norms, to do the right thing. And so within that, managing a classroom, right? 30 students. What are my policies? What are my procedures, solutions for managing that? On a campus, 3,000 students. What are my policies? What are my procedures? How do I manage that? What are the systems that go within that? From a school district, you go up to 30,000 students. What are my systems? What are my policies? What are my procedures? And that just keeps scaling to platforms. You have 3 million users. You have 30 million users. The issue, it's the economy of scale, but the concepts are still the same. So how do we tactically then start to break down those steps and then implement them together, whether it is AI as a tool, whether it is our community policies, whether it is our enforcement, or even just the community itself. A healthy community is a resilient community. A resilient community has risk. Without risk, they can't develop certain skills to cope. So how do we create those opportunities to not only build those skills, have those interactions, and then be able to recover when something happens that we know is not normal within that setting?
Wow. So that's quite a journey. Talk about Spectrum Labs. How have you integrated AI into your products and services?
Yeah, so we've been around about 4 years, natural language processing, contextual AI, to detect these behaviors online. So for example, within grooming, we have a model work with a group called Soeth. So if you're in the moderation space, and particularly if it's a minor that's being groomed, data privacy laws allows what you can and cannot keep in a platform. So we worked with a partner that had a lot of this data in place. You may know RuPaul. She has a TV show, Underage Undercover in America. It's on the Discovery Channel. I think it's on HBO Max now. But we had a lot of data from her conversations on what groomers would do in order to mislead a child online. And within that, as we started researching and labeling that data, we started to realize certain trends, right? So another variable, sort of an unintentional consequence was, how do humans communicate? So for example, if you use a smiley face emoji, like the laughing emoji, you're probably over 40, right? If you use two spaces after a period, you're definitely over 35. Right? And so when you start thinking about age verification and detecting youth on the platform or entering into sexual conversations, now you're looking at multiple data points. And something with a bad actor or a misalignment of community policies where someone violates something, it's not just one data point, but it's multiple data points. And what AI can do from a contextual process is identify over a period of time when something is happening very quickly, which humans cannot. And previously, much of this would happen when you might get a keyword or a sentence, or maybe it's just a message of this person's going offline. So in one particular instance, a platform that we work with implemented several of these models. One was the grooming, and what they saw is one was an increase in individuals who were trying to drive humans off platform to engage in an inappropriate conversation. But then they were also able to help individuals kind of get guided into the right space by detecting that. Through user reporting, what was fascinating is when they had humans were in the process of being victimized and the system caught it and the automated systems removed it, and they reached out to the person, hey, just so you're aware this is happening, and they're like, it's not happening. What do you mean? Like, no, we detected this thing that was going to happen. Like, no, they weren't doing that to me. And so it was interesting to see, and I think the value of automated systems, if done well, there's a lot of variables in that statement, but if done well, I think a lot of humans, there's an intent of thinking like, that'll never happen to me. Or there's an intent of, I'd be very aware if someone's trying to scam me. And I think most of us feel confident in that, but we found in some instances, people were just not aware. Right? They didn't know what was really happening. And so having that model, I think, can add a layer amidst all the other stuff that can really help individuals stay safe in these spaces.
You mentioned something that sort of caused me to think around age assurance, how many spaces past a, full stop. how do you, let's just open this up. How do you see generative AI or AI more generally impacting in a good or maybe not so good way the methods by which we are assured of someone's age? Anyone? Can make it easier, harder?
I mean, my understanding is it's already there. It's already being used. Maybe it's not mainstream yet, but I mean, we have Julie here looking at sort of products which are very good at things like facial estimation to detect age. We know that Meta, for example, said that it uses complex AI to detect and profile users to try and understand if they are overage or underage. So, you know, I'm not sure these are generative products, but we certainly have AI products already doing this. For me, I suppose, you know, one of the things that this might help with is we talk a lot about age verification, which is often a sort of a one-off thing. You provide a document, or you state your age, or you give a credit card. But it does seem to me that where AI may be helpful, particularly if we can do these in really privacy-protecting, data-minimizing ways with all the appropriate checks, is it'll give you more assurance in an ongoing way that the person perhaps that said they were X age is in fact X age, and therefore should still have access to that type of content. So I am optimistic that there is real potential here. I think for me the key is about ensuring that these are indeed data protecting and privacy minimizing, and perhaps with appropriate minimum standards, you know, governed. But I don't know, others?
Slight variation. I think I completely agree with your second point. The opportunity, particularly after there has been a known stated verification, how you use this from an ongoing age assurance potential in the ongoing environment, that's great. I think we are seeing a lot of people providing opportunities that they believe they've got, whether it's profiling or facial recognition, and those are not privacy enhancing, and those are not privacy protecting, and they are not what many of young people have signed on for, to be profiled before they have access to all types of services on the internet. So while those might be appropriate for specifically child-directed platforms, I think we're a little far off of having, I'll call it, appropriate privacy enhancing ways to think about it across the internet ecosystem while keeping the fundamental holistic rights of the child. But man, the opportunity for the assurance after you've met a moment at the front end does seem to be promising.
Henry, any thoughts on it?
I think, I mean, as Vicky rightly said, there are different bits of work and patterns which are taking place at the moment. This is one of the biggest problems that I think crosses over from Web 2.0 to Web 3.0. It also has a wider implication when we take it outside of just age verification and children, and we actually look at identity, and again, who's creating content using generative AI. So this is something which I think as a community we all need to look at and work on together. There are, as Vicky mentioned, great organizations like Yoti who care about privacy and have solutions in place that will help to address that. But the whole beauty of tech is that nowadays, again, going back to what Courtney said, it's almost like if you can dream it, you can build it. That's kind of the world that we're in now with no code and light code solutions. So I don't think that any one organization, any one party should look at this in isolation. It's then connecting through, I know we've mentioned Julie in Australia lots today, but Julie and Grant, the work that's being taken place in Australia, again, really leading the front on this, all comes down to the same issue. If we can help to identify in a privacy-focused way, it starts to move the debate forward in terms of actually what does a civil internet look like? It might not be a safe one, but it might be safer or be more civil.
Sure. Okay, so we had the regulatory session this morning. One thing actually we didn't get into was the new AI Act coming out of the EU, which is going to put new restrictions on AI, curtail use of facial recognition software, require creators of AI systems to disclose more about the data used to create their programs. What are your reactions so far on this? Are we happy about where things are going in the EU? I'll throw into the mix the Prime Minister in the UK wants the UK to be the world's leader in not quite sure what, but AI-ish things, right?
Number of prime ministers per year, maybe. I don't know that. Yeah.
So what are we to make? Courtney?
Oh, good. I think this is opening an important discussion, but the question I think is: are we hitting the sweet spot of understanding how regulations that are coming into force literally this fall and next year are going to help address some of the safety concerns in the AI context. How do we get to a place where we're actually understanding the effectiveness of regulatory schemes and then asking the hard question, what is the role of regulation addressing the next highest risk use?
Right.
And that's going to be hard because we know this is the era in which we're saying regulation fell way too far behind technology innovation. We seem to be trying to catch that up in a very short period of time, and are we going to hit the sweet spot that enables innovation? There are some core principles in the AI Act that do make a heck of a lot of sense. I think we understand why transparency at the heart of how these models are built makes sense. That gets at what you need to understand what you're going to potentially build into your systems and deploy. We do think it makes sense to focus on the highest risk applications of AI and not try to take a sweeping horizontal regulation at all applications of AI. That would be highly inconsistent with how we've thought about risk proportional approaches and safety. So there are some of those elements that make sense, but one of those questions is that fear moment overshaping that regulatory debate? How do we bring in a more holistic conversation? And are we agreed on what are those highest risk and sensitive uses? Let's focus on those. I think we would acknowledge facial recognition is one of those. Critical infrastructure makes sense, but let's make sure that you're leaving the space for innovation to unlock, I think what my colleagues have said, great opportunities to truly advance a safer internet that AI authorizes, allows, creates.
I was just conscious that if you want to jump in.
No, well, I agree with that. What's interesting to me, I think it's very quick to pass a law, but the good call out is that these are not new conversations. Facial recognition, algorithmic bias, other stuff. The hardest thing, pre-genAI, when I talk about AI, I know how much someone understands about AI based upon what they're quoting, and that tells me what article they read that week. Does that make sense? And the biggest thing on the moderation side that was hard to explain is that there is a heck of a lot of data that goes into AI, let alone generative AI. And one of the things in the back end, we talk about cloud services and other stuff, is what is going into labeling that AI? What is the data that's being used to train that AI? There's safety protocols that have been discussed. I don't think they've been in the public forum as much, but really having more conversations. So that's where I think the benefit to the regulations is it's calling for that. How are you creating this? What is creating this? What is the thought that's behind it? What is your process in doing all this stuff to understand that, can we trust this, right? And I 100% agree. I think the fear-based narrative is killing that conversation and really inhibiting what we're able to logically and ethically talk about. Like, these are the things that we need to make this safe versus, the traditional school mom running around, save the children and screaming in hair and oh, we got to protect. That's not the issue. It's just that we need to think about, we got a lot of knowledge in the space, right? We've heard safety by design, I think 20 times today. I don't know if anyone's keeping count. If you have count, let me know after, I'll give you a candy bar. But it's the safety by design, we have principles in this place. So now it's what does that look like for AI? And then defining that, which I think the regulation is trying to do.
Cool. Yeah, I think one of the biggest problems with laws, and I think of my previous career in actually carrying out and enforcing laws, is that sometimes they can be rushed through and sometimes they're not fit for purpose. The problem is at the moment, there is a very pressing need for commonly accepted rules globally to be in place. I think until that point steps in, there is an overriding moral obligation. I think back to what Andy said about civil engineers just before lunch. And that really resonated personally, because just as Matthew said around data labeling and data sets and the approach that you have to AI, nowadays, pretty much anything can be built. But there's a very important question that everyone needs to ask. Once you realize you can build something, should you? And that's one of the biggest questions that, again, just thinking of the work that we do, that we always hold ourselves to. Now, there are organizations now who have independent ethics committees that will help to come in and look at how they're operating. This, though, is very much on a individual basis from organisation to organisation. There is no common code of what's accepted. But if we draw back to what Andy was saying about actually if there was a general approach to AI, if you are looking to get a license to actually create and build AI to release it in the future, how should you hold yourself to account? And I think one of the biggest forces, not necessarily to look at legislation, but it's the market. If the people who are actually using the AI actually hold the companies creating it to a higher account and say, evidence to me, how have you labeled it? How have you built up the data set? How have you trained it? How are you building it? How are you deploying it? And they use that to inform their buying decision, then you'll see real change.
We need more philosophers, don't we?
Well, it depends what you're trying to accomplish. If it's
Ooh, burn. Yeah, go ahead. You were going to respond.
well, I'm a philosopher, so I suppose I can say that.
Oh, good.
I think so. I suppose if I was going to try and be fair to Rishi Sunak, which I don't often do, but I will try. Where I do think perhaps that initial statement around AI and regulation was helpful, was the sort of focus on sectoral expertise and sectoral regulation. So I think the AI Act that the EU is producing is probably the right approach overall. I do have some sympathy for sort of this increased focus on what sectoral regulation can and should accomplish. So, for example, if we go back to the examples we've been discussing, so either medical technology or educational technology, these are fields which have obviously the deepest understanding of what the correct ethical principles are, what the needs of consumers are, or what the existing principles are that might or might not be applied. And so, although I do think that initial sort of statement of let's not have any regulation, let's just leave it to the sectors was probably naive, and they've now backpedaled on that. I do think that the focus on the importance of sectoral regulation is really key and should not be forgotten whilst we look at the sort of brand new overarching regulations we're going to bring in. So I think we are really going to need both. And interesting, maybe just one other thing to flag up on that. I really love the way you were talking about the use of your products in the school setting. We've had some really interesting research going on at OII looking at EdTech specifically. And it's such a fascinating area because it promises so much. The potential for great new products in this area is phenomenal. But, again, thinking of how you ensure that those products do deliver value for money, that they are genuinely going to improve educational outcomes, that they do the right things with children's data, etc. That's really key in order to make the best of those products, to make the best of that market. So, I think you need both.
I want to talk about research in a minute, but can I just test how many questions are in the audience? Who's got a burning question, something they'd like to ask right now? If not, I'll come back to you in a few minutes. Let's just go back to you. And anyone can answer this, but what research is needed in this space? Because we are racing ahead in terms of legislation, in terms of rules, certainly in Europe. And we're racing ahead in other ways, too, in terms of rolling out products and services. Is there research that we should know about, Vicky, or is there stuff that you would love to see happening?
Sure. We've got great research already ongoing. So we've got a fantastic DPhil student finishing up her PhD at the moment, looking at how far we should be able to personalize large language models and what the limits on those should be. Nearly finished. Another great colleague at the moment looking at generative AI and the representation of different minority groups in art and sort of in a visual, so the DALL-E sort of scenario. That's just a couple of examples of ongoing stuff. Areas where obviously we need more research. Again, to throw it back to the things that Andy was talking about this morning, if we really want to know where the risks lie for children, we are going to need to understand how they are using these new tools, and specifically, relating to which children, in which social and family contexts, and how they engage with that. So, again, being able to engage with the platforms, to do this research with them is really key. And another, maybe last area, perhaps just to flag, I suppose, is also just to understand if we're introducing new governance regimes, how are these playing out, in the real world. I examined a great PhD student last week who was looking at ethics-based auditing, and had a great case study of this being used in AstraZeneca, for example. So understanding, how are companies responding with these new tool sets, and in what ways are they shaping decisions and behaviour. So I could go on and on, because you always need more research, but there you go, a few examples.
Love it. Any thoughts?
She did a wonderful all these questions are burning top of mind. I think at the heart of it truly is, how are children going to utilize generative AI? How can we think about that and better understand that? This community, above all communities, understands that's not a monolithic question, that needs to think about geographic, cultural, social, economic, and age differences, developmental differences, and learning style differences. We're all excited about that opportunity, and man, AI can really be at the heart of it, but let's really honestly understand how children and teens are going to use it. And that's some of the biggest questions that are facing us. I think we think one of the greatest opportunities truly is how to scale some of the safety risks, whether it has been radicalization and terrorism and violent extremism across languages and cultures. But we need to be incredibly transparent about the data that the language models and other models were trained on, to know that they're actually going to be effective in those cultural experiences. So I want all that research and a little bit more. So
Okay, we'll get going.
Yeah.
Either of you two want to respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's research that we're actually doing at the moment, very early stage, again, looking at generative AI for some of the issues that Vicky was touching on, hate towards different religious groups that can be portrayed and can come through in terms of the prompts that you can put in, and how does that differ from one religion to another. I think the beauty of organisations working in partnership with research is that there's the access to the data at scale, which helps, which means that, again, whilst this is a live debate and we see the headlines almost hourly at the moment that are coming out from fearmongers who are out there, that actually that marriage between industry and academia now can present so much meaningful data quickly and rapidly, which hopefully can then go in to educate Rishi and other leaders globally. And again, I think back to the questions you were asking this morning about your own homeland, and hopefully bring some of the insight back there as well.
Indeed. Matt?
Yeah, I recently had to do a project with Stanford University. They had some graduate students, and they were public policy and computer science. And they were all given an opportunity to work with ChatGPT 3.5 to develop models, classifiers, and work with the data. And two of the numbers that they shared consistently was precision versus recall. So moderation, precision is how accurately can it detect the information, versus recall, which could be over moderation, errors of moderation, or the system just like, we don't know what this is. And in each case, when I asked them how do they get to that precision rate, and ideally good precision is, if you're 70, 80%, you're crushing it, particularly if your recall is under 10%, like you're start a business, you're gonna make money. But the idea is, when they got to those numbers with small data sets, I would ask them, how did you get your precision to that number? And they all said the same thing. Well, we had to write better classifiers, and they said, we think we could get higher if we had better data. And so I'm like, again, playing with it, like being able to do research. How are people using it? Research into the data itself, right? We've had a lot of conversations around data labeling. Different platforms are releasing their own genAI models. So is there consistency in labeling? Are they going to function the same? Do they need to function the same? Or algorithmic recommendation systems is another one that I would love to see more of, right? How is content getting sent to us, particularly with generative AI, when in theory, it could be smarter than us. I don't know, we got 18 months, right? So how is content getting sent to us, recommended to us, and why should that matter, right? Why should we be thinking about that?
Can I add one more, since we have
Why
our
not?
community here for wish list? We've just conducted a very rapid literature review of our concerns around, honestly, the mental health crisis in children. And one of the most interesting opportunities that presented itself is almost 65% of girls, 60% of all kids, said they would love to utilize technology to access more mental health support and help, but only 10% had. Why is that the delta? What is it? How do you close that delta? That is one of the questions top of mind.
Interesting. All right, we got some questions starting to arise. We know the routine. Good catch.
Twice a week. Right. How worried should we be as trust and safety professionals about AI being turned against the sort of protective mechanisms we're putting in place, with safety tech, for example? Already in age verification, we're looking at how we can defend against people using injection attacks to make themselves look or sound older. Is this going to be a wider problem across safety tech?
That is a very, very good question. I think as we think about some of the safety concerns and opportunities, I think we really do approach it from the harms that we know right now and see the great opportunity for AI to get better at understanding child grooming, violent extremism, radicalization, and really thinking about better intervention methods. But you just touched upon one of the highest risks and where we spend a lot of our time is what is the jailbreak challenge for those that really do utilize to weaponize against. That has to be the place where people spend their time. The good news, back to how we've learned some lessons from the cybersecurity regime, et cetera, we've got some lessons about how those work, but we are in a new era where that has to be a prioritized space. I think that is the kind of, I'll call it three-dimensional, I'm trying not to say war room that we're in, landscape that we're in, and it needs to be top of mind. But the best way for us to all be thinking about it is recognizing that challenge is absolutely very, very astute in this environment.
I think following on from that, one of the biggest risks as well is volume. Because when we're talking about generative AI and you look at, 2 million messages can be created in a day, there's 150 million active daily users that are using the tools. The volume play historically was always limited either on just how much can a human create on their own, or if they are good enough at a programmer and they create a bot, how much can the bot create? But it's very easy to spot trends with bots. What we're getting to now is near human level application in terms of the output that's coming from there. And it's that volume at the moment which is the biggest headache for trust and safety. Because, again, if you're not almost like re-engineering the tools that sit behind chat and other generative AI, which is the transformer-based, you're literally trying to put out a fire with a teaspoon, and it's a huge building. Whereas, again, the approach we've gone is actually use the same tech and actually use it as a force for good. You're matching like for like. So that's, again, it's the opportunity, but also the risk that comes with it.
Yes, question here in the audience. Can we throw something at her?
This is the funniest.
Oh, no, you.
Back to that point we had of how do we help the next set of data engineers and developers, but also small organizations to build that ethics muscle. We had the analogy before of somebody learning how they cross the road, but we've already got people. And if you think of the small companies, the under 10 people startups around Europe being, say, 90% of the future innovation, how do we build that ethics muscle? I don't know, Vicky, maybe in your ethics-based auditing, if there are any clues, or I've seen one from Digital Catapult that had an ethics garage. But how do we, in the next, say, decade, ahead of us building that into the curriculum like we have for medical science, students, they start with the ethics when they sign up for their medical degree. We've got a bunch of people out there for the next decade that haven't had that. So I don't know if we've any thoughts as to how we fill it in for this generation.
Such a huge question. I really want to hear what you guys say as well. But I mean, for me, there's a couple of quite obvious things. So the first is I think that we need to look at what we're teaching in universities. We need to look almost, at every relevant degree that we are then using to recruit for in production of these technologies. So, you often hear the call for we need ethics for computer scientists. Well, maybe we do need to be building that in. But actually, of course, we're not just hiring computer scientists in these companies. So I think that's the first thing is we need to look at what we're teaching in universities generally. The second, I suppose, we've also heard reference to it is there a need for sort of either licensing or accredited qualifications for particular parts of this type of work, whether that be software engineering, whatever. That's the second part. And I suppose the third, actually, I'm quite interested to know what government can do around this. I'm sure, and you might know actually more than me, Julie, but I have this sense, and that you might also know, I have this sense of about 10 years ago, there being efforts, for example, in the UK context, to introduce almost like sort of safety tool sets or safety guidance or ethics guidance for small business startups, which was, again, recognizing that you could distill this, perhaps some of the basics at least into sort of, small amounts of information. You didn't have to reinvent the wheel each time. But yeah, so I suppose that's the thing. I would want to look at almost every route into sort of starting a business. So, who you're going to hire, how you're going to think about it, where you're going to get the money from. VCs, another one, frankly, we ought to do a lot more with VCs and investors, I think, around ensuring sort of responsible investment. So yeah, look at every bit of this ecology, I think.
I love it. I'll add two more to the collage. I think that's what you just said.
Ecology. Collage. I like collage more.
I like it.
Yeah.
One of the things as we launched our responsible AI program over 6 years ago, we had been investing in STEM education globally and had been a real commitment. We immediately transferred what it meant to build in responsible AI principles to STEM education grants that we're giving in the K-12 level across the globe, and think that needs to be part of that core curriculum. I have to say, one of the jokes that happened on my poor team last year was when we attended a trust and safety first annual conference, not telling you which one that was. Some of my colleagues in the privacy were coming from their 52nd annual privacy conference, the International Association of Privacy Professionals. And I said, if that doesn't tell us the level of where we are right now from an overall professionalization of this ecosystem, I don't know what else does. We actually sent it around to a large swath of our company to say, we're going to have to build this up. And so to me, there is that certification, that professional certification, and how you get everyone in the ecosystem looking to build and culture and create that.
Can I say one more thing? I dissed philosophers before because I couldn't think of a witty response. This is a classic thing. You need more humanities students generally, in these companies and in these roles, for goodness sake.
Here.
So, yeah.
Chief Philosophical Officer, CPO.
Yeah.
You got it. Is there another question before we wind up? All right. Well, so here's the thing. We've got a bunch of optimists up here. I'm going to just try and challenge you to be a little pessimistic. We mentioned sleep, and I'm just going to ask you, what does keep you up at night? Is there a particular concern? Is there a little bit of a worry around this that you would like to share with the audience? And anyone can start.
For me, it's the environmental costs.
Say more.
Ooh.
So we've spent a lot of time over the last few years accepting the fact that we don't pay for most of our services online, therefore we don't really recognise what their financial cost is. And clearly, there are now huge economic and environmental externalities to these products as well, which also we now don't take into account when we're using them. So I really worry that we will overconsume these fantastic products in ways that will expand the potential environmental footprint of this sector in ways that will be bad for us all on our planet.
Yeah, server farms are not cheap.
Yeah.
No. Okay.
I think what keeps me awake is missed opportunity. We've seen that Web 2.0, whilst organisations like FOSI and others were leading the charge, helping to raise the awareness of safety issues that could come through the technology. We're ahead of that now. We're appreciative of it. We can see what's coming ahead with Web 3.0. If we don't seize this opportunity now and we let it go by, we're simply repeating past mistakes.
Interesting. Yeah.
For me, we've had a lot of conversations today about the need for trust and safety and safety by design and learning from the past, et cetera. And what's been disheartening in this past year is, as much as we say we need that, is the amount of layoffs that have happened in trust and safety across the board. I think are going to hamper us in the long term. I don't think we've seen what that fallout's going to look like yet. And what I've learned in any institution, if you don't have someone who can think about these things and own these issues and advocate for them internally, that's when things get lost, mistakes happen, and bad things end up as the result, whatever that could be. So I'm hoping that as we enter this conversation on genAI, that we start investing in professionals who have experience in safety, who know how to do this work, who can advocate for it, and sort of be, I don't know, that squeaky wheel is kind of a negative connotation, but could be that person inside and be like, hey, we need to look at it from this angle and really advocate for that work going forward.
Courtney, last word.
I think I'm a bridge there. We know the potential of AI only comes when you keep humans at the center of it and you keep human agency at the center of it. And I feel that there's too many places along the ecosystem at the ability to cut off humans, whether we sit here today and pretend that humans are going to get rid of all those that have to support a content moderation ecosystem. That's not true. If there's not human thought within that, then we are not keeping humans at the center. Similarly, if we create artificial barriers that do not enable children to actually use, test, and play with this, and artificial barriers typically come in a law that means a child doesn't have to apply it and they still access the technology, but allows some guardians and parents to keep their heads in the sand, that there's a law that's protecting their children and they aren't being agents of making sure their children are experimenting. I'll give those two things as.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, you remember at the beginning I asked you to think of a number. Did anyone's number change listening to this? Up or down? Anyone?
Mine moved up.
You went up?
Mine went up.
To what?
Well, I'm gonna give you your strong 7.5. I was 5 because we all know the tool and weapons, but it's nice to be with a community that is thinking a lot about the tool. You just have to have some more conversations about the opportunities. It pushes you in the right direction.
Wow, well, it's worth the price of admission right there. All right, well, listen, thank you all very much. And please, let's thank this wonderful panel here.